Welcome back everyone to another Kaiserreich country overview, and this time we'll be taking a look at another Horn of Africa superstar, Ethiopia or Abyssinia. Now, Ethiopia, it's an empire in East Africa that is basically the only African state that survived through the scramble of Africa without getting colonized by European powers, and now it is struggling with its own feudal backwardness. So it is a pretty interesting setup, and the Emperor Haile Selassie essentially has to bring his country into the modern world, otherwise the empire, it will be essentially nothing more than a curiosity and a backwater, and pretty much prey to angry, aggressive warlords from Somalia, German economic interests, or even, internal divisions. So this is basically the start, an empire at the crossroads, as they say, and this is pretty much the situation in which Ethiopia was in historically as well in 1936, but there are a couple of changes, of course. The main one being that there isn't an angry, expansionist, and maybe a little incompetent, but still possessing a mechanized army foe to the north and to the east. Because, of course, in our timeline we have Italian Somaliland over here, and then we have Italian Eritrea up here. So Mussolini's ambitions for an empire aren't a problem in the Kaiserreich timeline, although, I guess Mussolini can eventually become a problem if he somehow manages to get a lot of things done up here, but absolutely that is not your primary concern. Your primary concern when it comes to Europeans are the Germans, who have both Deutsch Mittelafrika as a sort of dependency south of you, and then Djibouti and possessions in Yemen down in the north and on the other side of the Red Sea. The other problem is Somalia, being a pretty expansionist little collection of warlords, and then also again Ethiopia's internal problems, which are going to be occupying you for most of the game. Now, the Germans are the ones who have the most economic influence in the area through the DPAB railroad, which is a railroad that runs through Ethiopia and was financed by German economic possessions and interests. And of course, it is owned by German private companies, but since we're heading straight to Black Monday, it's going to crash, and then it's going to provide you with quite a lot of choices. Now, you have several problems. Let's just get that away. You can go back and pause if you want to read all of that if you didn't already. We'll keep the military for a little later. First thing that you do pretty much, well, I think it is best to do pretty much all the time, is dealing with the debt, because you start off with this crippling debt modifier, which is actually pretty bad. It costs 0.20% political power cost daily. Now, as you can see right now, playing on veteran difficulty, with that minus 25%, if I were to select a national focus, I would be going down daily. So you will be losing stability quite fast, and you'll be hemorrhaging that. And you have option of taxing various, I guess you could say, autonomous privileged groups within society, namely minorities over here, Eritrea and the Oromo, and then the privileged, the church and the slave owners. The one that you have to watch out for is introducing taxation to Eritrea, because this is going to lead to Eritrea's attempt at independence. I have seen this happen on various timelines. I've seen this happen pretty much right at the start, but I've also seen it happen in like 1939. It really depends. You can actually avoid the Eritrean Independence War if you take the tribal integration and officer integration and then integration of Eritrea path, which we're going to be looking at now. This part, the reforms, is something that is going to be at the end. So for the economy, it's pretty simple. It's all reliant on what you want to do with the railroad, the DPAB, and you can either nationalize it, or you can privatize it and sell it off to German private, corporations. This leads to more German investment in your country, and it's not really that strong when it comes to just sheer numbers of factories. You overall get 2 of each, so you get 2 militaries and 2 civilians, whereas down here in the nationalized railroad you get 2 civilian factories and 4 military factories, and also 2 dockyards over here. So it's all a lot better for overall factory numbers and also overall infrastructure if you go with the nationalization route. But what you do get for the privatization, also by the way, this industrial modernization requires only one of the 2. So you can, this little part, you can go down any path and you will still be able to take all of these. With the privatized railroad, however, you do get at the end the German military mission, which is a quite awesome modifier, giving you pretty much some great bonuses to your army. The most important part, however, is going to be the path that goes under the expand railroad into Eritrea, because then you're going to get quite a lot of focuses to integrate Eritrea into your country, and eventually you go down and get a core on Eritrea and you get the development in Eritrea. So that's where you get those extra factories from nationalized railroad. However, what's kind of interesting is that you get a core on Eritrea state, but you don't get a core on Dankalia over here. That's gonna stay a colony state forever, I think. Just kind of interesting. Now, looking over the army very quickly. Pretty standard stuff. Actually, no, not standard stuff, but pretty standard stuff for Eastern Africa. It is not really a modern professional army in the way that you'd think. There's 5 infantry divisions, 3 militia divisions, and 1 mountaineer division. However, with these 78,000 men, you only have 38% that are actually equipped at the start. So that is a very, very bad situation. You start off with 4,000 rifles deficit. And with only 2 military factories to start off with, and 5 civilian factories to build other military factories, it's going to be a slow build-up. Plus, this isn't actually entirely represented here, but I love the detail in Kaiserreich. It's always that good. And you can sort out how the army is sort of organized this way. So you have these normal units over here. And then what's awesome is that these militias, they all come, you can see the name, right? These are where they come from. So for example, the Asmara Safari probably comes from Asmara. The Oromia probably comes from Oromo over here. And then the Harar probably comes from Harar over here. These are all the autonomous / less well integrated areas into Ethiopia. So for example, of course, Eritrea is not ethnically Ethiopian. Oromo people are a little bit ethnically separate from the Amharic up here. That's just kind of off the top of my head. I might be saying wrong things. And then Harar, there's Somalian populations in here, and there's a Somalian claim. So the militias are from less well integrated areas. Then you have the normal army. You have the Sadamo Safari, which is your mountaineer unit. I've looked up Sadamo, it's somewhere over here. So that, you're more adept at fighting in the mountains populations, and they're just 6, whereas these are 9 and these are 9 battalions each. So that's basically the composition, pretty normal stuff. And then what's pretty cool is that these 5, you have where is it? Okay, so only this unit and this unit. This is the Imperial Guard, and this is the Central Army. I've looked up a few things, and these were actually the only troops that were controlled by the central government reliably, even in our timeline. So these 2 technically should be the most important. As you can see, they start off in the capital. Whereas these other ones, as you can see, they bear the name of cities and regions. They're all regional warlord, well, not really warlord, but I guess you could say feudal levies. And this is actually represented in aristocratic military and army of levies. This is altogether a staggering minus 35% division organization that you're going to have to deal with. Then you also have another terrible modifier, which is slavery. Now, this is actually not the worst modifier, I know, right? Slavery. Because minus 5% consumer goods factories, it's useful. Especially later on as you expand your industry. It's not bad at all to have slavery, even though It costs political power. It costs national unity. It's not that much, so I feel like this should probably be increased. But anyways, this leads down to the reforms now. The reforms is basically... Oh, by the way, there's also this budget readjustment, which allows you to switch your budget to either construction, military, or something else. Construction, military, or civilian production, right? And it's either production efficiency bonus, the infantry equipment production, and planning speed, I think, for the military production, and then construction is just construction speed. So you can help industrializing your country that way, and kind of I guess you could say steer the development in one way or another. Most important and I guess interesting part are these reforms. So you can do these 5 reforms into 5 most important and pressing issues, which is slavery, agriculture, bureaucracy, I guess you could say the aristocracy, and the military. Interestingly enough, there's no industry line. It's kind of, I guess, just thinking that that's going to come later and naturally. For slavery, well, actually for all of these, you have 2 or 3 options in each of these events. Each of these last, well, okay, so the first focus in each of these just gives you a bonus of some kind. So for example, as you can see, agriculture, monthly population, bureaucracy, political power, etc., etc. The second one gives you an event, which allows you to pick and choose between various different political factions and their stance on a particular issue. Starting off with, you have 3 main ones. You have the Democrats, aka the pro-Western, you have the Emperor, and you have the noble aristocracy. So what's awesome is that each of these is going to have 2 or 3, again, usually 2, but in some 3 options, and each of those is going to switch around your party popularity for social conservatives, which is the Democrats, authoritarian Democrats, which is the Emperor, and then the paternal autocrats, which is the status quo elite. And each of these decisions is going to swing in one way or another your party popularity. And at the end, when you finish the reforms, you can draft a new constitution. And what this is going to do is it's going to draft either a popular constitution if you chose mostly democratic westernizing options. For example, if in the slavery question you outlaw slavery, and that's going to, by the way, remove that slavery modifier, that's how you remove it, then that's going to increase the popularity of the Democrats. And if, for example, in the tax question you build up a modern bureaucracy, that's also going to favor the democratic westernizing faction. But if, for example, you take, instead of the slavery question, you take to keep slavery legal, then that's going to increase the popularity of the noble aristocracy. And so in the end, depending on your choices, you get one of these 3. So it's not like you can choose either of these. You get one of these approved depending on which constitution, quote unquote, you're drafting, depending on how you respond to all of these issues, which is something that's kind of, interesting. What I like about it is that all these focuses take 70 days except the reforms over here, and I believe, no, just all of them except the reforms and the deal of our debt takes 70 days. So in the end, this ends up basically keeping you occupied for like 2 or 3 years of in-game time. Well, that's realistic because, you can just reform all of these things, all these very, very big question and issues in like a year or so, realistically. It's Hearts of Iron, so while that's happening, you're just going to be kind of watching what's happening around the world, just kind of going blah, 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 because it's not like with 2 military factories and 5 civilian factories at the start, you're going to be able to industrialize very strongly before that, or build up a big military. So you're going to be basically just forced to kind of sit and watch what's going on around the world. And well, that's fine because it's Kaiserreich, so there's always something happening and something new happening that you've never seen. You'd rather get stuck in on the action quicker. And then at the end, you of course check out the different paths. it's nothing really too strange. Also, once you finish these reforms, you can also turn your attention to Somalia, which is actually a little bit of a tougher war than you imagine, because especially on veteran difficulty, the Somalians are actually somehow a little bit stronger than Ethiopia, because they don't have quite as many bad modifiers as the Ethiopians, while the starting industry is pretty similar. And also the starting army for Somalia is actually superior to the starting Ethiopian army, and it doesn't have these rifle issues. So overall, not the easiest war to fight Somalia, still pretty fun to do. And at the end, you of course have the option of either, the nobles, the emperor, and the democrats. What do these actually entail? Well, the nobles are pretty much the most boring. I mean, if you pick in these reforms, if you pick options that favor the aristocracy, usually you're going to be keeping these bad modifiers like slavery, aristocratic military. The army of levies part, you can remove by going down the military reforms, so you can remove that still. That's like the worst problem with the minus 30% division organization, but you're still going to be keeping at least the aristocratic military, which is very, very not good. I mean, minus 5% organization and minus 5% planning is not good. So you're going to be keeping a whole lot of bad things. What you're going to be gaining is a lot of political power. Not only the path in it has a lot of political power, but most of these events, usually the price for removing these bad modifiers and increasing your democracy popularity is political power, because you're angering you're upsetting the status quo. And so, of course, the people who are mostly benefiting from the status quo, the elites, are not going to be very happy at you, and those are the people that right now are the most important. So that's what's going to destroy essentially your stability. Eventually, later on, once you build up the democratic system, you can get some things to fix that. But hey, this is going to stabilize your country more. Then you have the emperor path, which is also pretty stable, but a little less stable than the aristocracy path. It's also a little bit more interesting. You get a few more modifiers. For example, this is very nice, the Empire of the Lion. And then you get some new ministers, pretty normal stuff. And then just tiny plus 3% production efficiency gap. What's most interesting is the democratic path, because then you actually get to hold the elections. And the elections are quite interesting. There's 4 parties. You're probably going to be seeing the election events going right now on screen. And there's also going to be essentially, I've listed in an autistic way, essentially, all of the different modifiers that you get from the different ministers that you're going to be getting out of these elections. That's pretty much the main difference between these 4 parties. The 4 parties that you get in the election are the Social Conservative Democracy League. I'm guessing it's Democracy League. Then the United Ethiopian Democratic Front, which is the Market Liberals. The something Union of Democrats. That's Social Liberals. And then the Social Democrats. And all of those are essentially the same, except they have different ministers. They don't really have a lot of inside flavor to them. I don't think there are that many follow-up events, at least not that I've seen. I haven't played that far into Ethiopia, but it's pretty much what you'd expect. But overall, after you've dealt with Somalia, after you've dealt with your internal political issues, there's really only 2 ways you can go. You can either go ahead and try to expand into Egypt or into Dutch Middle Africa. Of those, the second, I believe, is the more interesting choice. It's even more interesting if there's the Afro-implosion for Middle Africa and all the different African miners get released, because then you can really get to play around with what's happening around Africa. And yeah, historically, Ethiopia was quite important, and still is quite important symbolically to, I guess you could say, all the Pan-African movements, because, well, it was again the only country that avoided not really country, state that avoided colonization, except of course in our timeline for a brief moment between 1936 and 1945 basically. But yeah, it's still kind of a legacy that's actually reflected in the focus tree in the military part. You can either go ahead and get more foreign military assistance with higher Askari veterans foreign doctrine that goes down and gets your choice between superior firepower and grand battle plan, or you can go with the legacy of the Doha. The Battle of Doha is like the main, well, it says Doha, I've always read it as Adwa, but still it's like the big battle that decided Abyssinia's independence from Italy in like 1870 something. I don't remember. Let me just look it up very quickly. Yeah, basically just defeat, big Italian defeat, and just kind of humiliation, allowing Ethiopia to continue its independence for just a slight while more. 1889. Wait, what? 1889 according to the Ethiopian calendar. So 1896 according to our calendar. Okay. So I had it off by only 20 years. Okay, that's fine. Anyway, that's basically mass assault doctrine. I think that this part of the military focus tree is actually more interesting because you get that anti-imperialist spirit, which is more defense and attack on core territory, and then you get more production for infantry equipment, sorry. And I think that all of that is just a little slightly more interesting than what you get in the Askari veterans, although you do get an extra, of course, military factory, which is quite strong. I mean, it's not as, I guess you could say, I guess, just, it's more generic. And yeah, pretty much that's just about it. So, Ethiopia, lots of modernization that you have to do, lots of dealing with the remnants of essentially German influence in the area, and lots of anti-colonial, good old-fashioned anti-colonialism to boot. So pretty much that's all. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you'll drop a like if you did. If you didn't, go ahead and dislike. And I'll see you soon.